Hi, Diane.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. It's
Good.
nice to put a name with the face. Thank you.
Erin, huh? Right?
Yeah,
Your, yeah, your name didn't pop up there. Great to meet you.
great to meet you. How's the day going so far?
Ah, crazy busy, but good. How about you?
Pretty busy. I'm just glad I'm able to join the experts
Yeah,
for this
yeah. I
important
mean, it's
conversation.
really, I was with a group yesterday, and we were saying the one thing about being able to do this on Zoom is at least we can really see people.
Yeah,
And the fact that we can be like all over the city, back to back to back. So, I mean, in a way, it makes it crazy, but on the other hand, it's kind of cool.
indeed. Are there any events that are coming up that's being hosted by the League of Women Voters in NYC or if the
Yeah,
affiliated chapters?
right. We're doing a lot. We're doing a lot of kind of partnership events. So yesterday, I was at an event with the what's it called? Rise to Win, which is the professional athletes. And they were doing an event with New York Giants football players and the students, high school and college students on Staten Island. and it was great. They had 100 kids on the Zoom call, and then these 4 New York Giant football players talking about the importance of voting. And I was there to kind of give the, the how-to stuff, but they were the ones giving the inspirational, compelling reasons. And they were great. It was really fun.
Wow, that sounds really amazing.
Yeah.
I think it's just interesting, and it's reassuring that you have athletes, celebrities that are taking an interest in this election.
Yeah. I think it kind of grew out of the whole Black Lives Matter and social justice campaigns that a lot of, especially I think the football players and the basketball players were involved with. And now it's super organized, and they're doing, I think every team has its own initiative and what they're doing.
Yeah, I read an article in the New York Times maybe about a month ago, and it mentioned how LeBron James in particular was working with a lot of owners of stadiums, sports stadiums, to use those venues as voting.
Yeah.
So that's quite amazing.
Yeah, that was so cool. I saw that too. That looked great. I mean, I just think, there's just so much happening. We're partnering with the Ethical Culture School here in the city.
Yeah.
And I'm doing little civics lessons with 6th graders, which is hilariously fun.
That's awesome.
So, but I'll talk about it in my part of the presentation, but they're actually doing a postcard campaign with us, the kids.
Awesome.
So, I feel like, what about you guys? What are your targets and what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so we know that this election is important for different sectors of community, but we tend to provide a LGBTQ lens to the work that we're doing. And
Right.
so over the past couple of months, we've been thinking about how we could get out the vote and encourage LGBTQ people to be involved in such an important process.
Right.
And so we've been creating materials, one-pagers. We've utilized our volunteer base to contact prospective voters throughout the state of New York,
Great.
just reminding them what's at stake.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we're a 501c3.
Yep.
Can't necessarily endorse candidates or a particular party,
Right.
but the goal of our work is to provide baseline voter education, which is why we have events like this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we're just trying to make sure that everyone gets out to vote.
Yeah.
Our particular focus is on making sure that LGBTQ people turn out because of the stakes of this election.
Yeah. And it's also, one of the things we're looking at is moving forward after this election, we go directly into the city election, which is also going to be hugely important. The mayor, the city council, the whole crew, that is going to be a massive turnover. And so it's like no rest for the weary. As soon as, this election is passed, we feel like we've got to kind of ride the wave of the momentum that we build, for people to understand that we're not done. We've got the local election that's going to be probably, if not more, then certainly as impactful on communities in New York.
Certainly, yeah, we're not done by a long shot, and hopefully, as we begin this webinar, hopefully it will guide voters through the process and just give them some information that they may not have had before today. So,
yeah.
Really
How
excited.
many of these have you done so far, Aaron?
So this is like an installment in a series. So we usually do these quarterly. The last webinar that we did was based on the census. And so we partnered with the New York Immigration Coalition, NALEO, and the Center for Law and Social Justice to speak about the implication that census have on different communities in terms of funding, allocation of resources and such. And so if there is an important civic engagement issue that is pertinent to different communities, we tend to use the webinars as a forum to unpack those issues and discuss them in a simplified way for community.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Yeah, we actually just had a meeting just before I came on here we're still trying to figure out, so when is the census going to end?
Yeah.
Because there you are. Hey, Leslie.
Hi, I'm Leslie Siegel. I'm Diane's co-president with the league. Nice to meet you all.
Aaron, this is Leslie.
Let me just introduce myself. Good afternoon. I'm Eddie from Dominicanos USA. Thank you again for this opportunity. But answering your question and hearing you, you know, we sympathize a great deal with what we've been doing, with what you've been doing as well. And you know, the question of the census has something that has everybody intrigued. You know, it's at October 31st, but we have to continue. We are in our outreach. We're just saying, you know, just do it today because we don't know when it will end immediately. But really being attacked in all fronts, and not only the census, but as well, you know, the citizenship application with the wanted to increase the fees. I mean, it's and the only way we really could get out this information is through these webinars, you know, and providing the information that our community needs. So congratulations, Aaron, because, you know, you've been a great job, as well as, you know, the League of Women Voters.
Thank you.
For
and
sure.
Also, Eddie, you too, right? Dominicanos does such great work.
We learn from you. We learn from you. Okay, I'll tell you the story someday about it. Okay, when we first started out.
That would be awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. I think we'll begin. So, welcome to our RiseOut Synergy session entitled "Out to Vote." We're so excited for you all to be here. My name is Aaron Sanders. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Outreach and Organizing Coordinator at the LGBT Center here in New York City. Again, we are really excited for you all to be here. And as we gear up for an important election, we hope that today's webinar is insightful and informative as you begin to cast your ballots and register to vote. So just a few processes to keep in mind. All mics have been muted with the exception of the speaker. And this is so that we do not distract whoever's speaking at the moment. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded. So if you want to share this webinar with anyone within your network, it will be readily available on the center's YouTube page. Throughout the duration of today's webinar, I will pause and ask each of our panelists questions. If anyone in the audience has questions, there will be time at the end of today's webinar to pose questions to our panelists directly. But in the meantime, if any questions arise, or if you think of any thought-provoking questions, feel free to use the chat function, and I will be sure to address your question and pose it to the panelists. So a quick word about today's webinar. So this webinar is a part of our RiseOut Synergy Session series. And essentially, these webinars are designed to support LGBTQ and allied communities with relevant advocacy opportunities. In addition, it's a way for us to partner with community-based organizations across the state who are doing similar work. And essentially, these webinars allow us to mobilize and focus on LGBTQ-specific campaigns. In this instance, we're focusing on Get Out the Vote. A quick word about RiseOut. So RiseOut is the state advocacy arm of the LGBTQ Community Center. It is a advocacy initiative that is statewide. We currently partner with 50 organizations throughout every region of New York State. And we work collectively to make sure that we're moving the needle on LGBTQ specific rights. So before we dig into the meat of the presentation, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speakers today. We have Trevon Mayers, Director of Policy and Community Outreach at the LGBT Community Center. We have Eddie Coosta, the Executive Director at Dominicanos USA. Diane Burrows, Co-President at the League of Women Voters, and Stephanie Bizzell, Director of Policy and Advocacy at College and Community Fellowship. I want to thank you all for lending your expertise to such an important issue and educating our audience about what's at stake. So without further ado, I will pass it over to my colleague, Trevon Mayers, who has been working diligently on GOTV issues. And he will speak more about the work that we're doing at the center to mobilize and energize prospective voters. So without further ado, I'll pass it to Trevon Mayers.
Hi, everyone, and thank you all for joining. Thank you for participating. Like I mentioned, my name is Trevon. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Policy and Community Outreach at the LGBT Center. GOTV is going to be one of our major focuses over
I think Trevon is having a bit of technical difficulties. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Great, so Trevon is having a bit of technical difficulty, but he mentioned that GOTV will be one of the more important priorities that we're working on at the center. This year we've been focusing on census, but we know that voting has a direct impact on not only LGBTQ community members, but people of color. And so because of this very reason, we want to make sure that we are making strides and making sure that folks are registered to vote. So to provide additional context, in the 2016 general election, New York State ranked 41st out of 50 in terms of voter turnout in the state. And this is not necessarily good. And although we've made some strides in the midterm elections, there is still work to be done to make sure that we are mobilizing LGBTQ community members. And so ultimately, the central goal is to continue to mobilize community and get them out to vote. And this is, again, this is something that we're making headway on, but as we know, this current administration has been apathetic to LGBTQ rights, and that is a driving force behind the center's strategy as it relates to GOTV organizing. But we know voting is the first step. So after voting, there has to be policy implementation. We have to vote in legislators who care about issues that affect people of color, LGBTQ people, immigrants. And so after these elections, our next goal is to mobilize community to help pass legislation that we care about that will ultimately affect LGBTQ people. And so there's a lot of ways that you can get involved to stay up to date about where you can vote. If you need additional information about how you can vote, the 3 ways that you can vote, we encourage you to text JOIN to 69866. And this is a way for us to stay connected to thousands of LGBTQ people and allies who care about LGBTQ rights. And so we know that this is an important election, and there's been a lot of misinformation about how you can vote, what's at stake. And so we regularly communicate with our volunteer base through, we regularly communicate with community through our text messaging. So again, you can text JOIN to 69866. But also what's important and perhaps the most important resource that we have is is our website, gaycenter.org/vote. So if you go to that website, you will be able to access a plethora of information about voting deadlines, how you can vote safely, information about who's on the ballot. And it's sort of a one-stop shop for all of your questions related to GOTV. So again, if you know anyone who needs information or anyone who is interested in learning more, feel free to direct them to gaycenter.org/vote. And with And with that, I will segue to Eddie Coosta at Dominicanos USA, who will speak about sort of the work that is happening there and sort of what's at stake for Latinx communities. So without further ado, I will pass it to Eddie.
Well, thank you very much, Aaron, for the opportunity to really be part of this important RiseOut, get out the vote, voting information, as well as Trevor. And I would also like to thank our other participants, Diane and Stephanie, for really taking out time this afternoon, to really provide some context and information in reference to our voting for the November 3rd election. Just to add a little bit, Dominicanos USA is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that started in 2013 out of Ostos Community College in the South Bronx. Since then, we've been very active, working to making sure that we could empower our community through civic, social, and economic integration, being a fabric of this great nation. So we developed a system to go out into the community to do voter registration and to really bring awareness to the importance of registering to vote. So far in the last 7 years, we have been able to yield more than 170,000 voter registration. Just in New York alone, over 125,000. We have been able to really be out there in the communities at different events, making sure commercial corridors, schools, and other important areas where our community really gathers. We also are very proud to say that in some of the events that we have had held throughout the Bronx and through other part of the community, we have always received the support of the League of Women Voters and other organizations as NYC Votes, having tables. And the idea of voting registration is really touching the people and talking to them. Presently in this election, we know the pandemic has created a situation that's very difficult. We ask everybody that's watching this program to stay safe, wear their mask. And Dominicanos USA, just to the pre-pandemic, was out in different schools doing student voter registration day, visiting different schools, as we don't have pre-teen voter registration, which is very important in terms of really getting our young people, at the younger age, to know the importance of participating in the electoral process and learnings. Once they turn 18, they could really go out there and vote. So that was a good part of our program. We are so sad that, this had to be stopped, but we still have been out in the community, very limited, visiting some of the pantries, and making sure with our census team and our voter registration team, using social distancing, we have been able to at least, provide some voting information to our community. I could say that just last evening, we had an event up on 161st Street and Jerome Avenue, where we had other partners, NYC Votes, the Manhattan, the Bronx Borough President, and more than 300 voter applications was provided. So there is a huge need of people to continue to register to vote, as well as taking some registration. During National Voter Registration Day, we were also very active. We were able to have tables, the Board of Elections participated with us, in those events. So there's still a need. We're very sad that, with the the legislation in the state of New York did not approve online voter registration. They approved automated voter registration, which should kick off in 2023, when online voter registration, the only thing you had to do was turn it on. The Senate approved it, but the Assembly did not. So, we have had to, adapt to new models, online voter registration using tools, platform that at least could get our community registered, and as well as those that have an ID that will be able, motor vehicles ID, they could go into the website, the motor vehicles department to register to vote. We have a big challenge ahead of us, and this is a tremendous need for us to inform our community the importance of really, voting by mail, which is, as you mentioned, the 3 ways that we could vote. Vote by mail, which is so important. We had certain experience during the June 23rd primaries, some confusion because we didn't know if the presidential was going to be on, but now we have sufficient time. So people have the opportunity that they could request their ballot, which I think is so important if you could do so. And then we have early voting, which is something that's fairly new. Poll sites will be open, starting on the 24th all the way through November 1st. So that's a tremendous opportunity for us to really mobilize our community in order for them, if, there won't be such a huge crowd, they could go early. And then, the other good part about it is that there are drop boxes where people could drop off their ballot. And the third is going on election day, to vote. So part of our strategy is to continue mobilizing our community through social media, emails. We are already preparing to start our get out the vote, with texting, phone bankings. We are planning to do more than 50,000 texts, more than 12,000, close to 12,000 phone calls, to making sure people go early. So that's very important to us in terms of how we could touch it. The sad part about it is we will not be doing door knocks, which is such an important component. But at the end, we have to say that there is a lot of opportunities, and people could go to the, voter lookup. There's a lot of tools that are available in order for us to really find out, specifically what, where you could go on, for early voting. So saying all of this, I think it's also very important. I just received my request to vote by mail. It's so important because, as today, when you receive your vote by mail, you have to really figure out specifically the stamp, the return envelope that you have to put. Some, depending on the community, depending on the size of the ballot, don't know if it will be a regular, 50-cent stamp. So it's very important for people, whoever have requested an absentee ballot, that they could really go over it, make sure that, it's the appropriate name. They will sign, the envelope and mail it, because there will be an opportunity just before the election day. So we all have a big challenge, and I really commend, the work that you're doing in putting this panel together to really provide, important information on voting. And I could add that you had mentioned just before we went onto this webinar that, our community, especially in the South Bronx and other communities, in terms of self-response, to the census, that has been a challenge. So people making sure that, they've returned their census form, and at the same time, they could also register to vote, that there's still opportunities until October 9th, which is the last day that you could register to vote. So there's still opportunity. Register to vote. Make sure you use your resources. And as you could see in the slide that you have presented, this is some of the outreach that we have done and continue to do so. We have been participating in every election since we started. In 2016, we had the opportunity where there was an urge and a rush for people to become U.S. citizens. We've been working with, the citizenship to those legal permanent residents, to making sure they could register to vote once they are sworn in. But, sadly, we haven't seen, the numbers with registration as, we thought this presidential election year. But DUSA have continued to really provide through a portal that we are partnered with to help our community to become U.S. citizens. Virtual, this is the way of the future, as we could see, and it's so important at least to provide that message. And at the same time, those that we have helped to become legal permanent, U.S. citizens that were legal permanent residents, we've been reaching out to them to making sure if they were sworn in that they could register to vote, and that's part of our mission and the work that we do. So really, Dominicanos USA is always open to participating with any community organization that is willing to promote, voter registration, citizenship. And at the same time, we're looking for volunteers, that could help us, in terms of our work, our outreach, especially the youth, which is so important for us to really mobilize them in this important presidential general election that we are having on November 3rd.
Certainly. Thank you, Eddie, for providing that additional context. And if you don't mind, I would like to ask you two questions to sort of get at the heart of what you're working on. And hopefully these two questions will guide prospective voters through the process. And that first question is, so in the 2018 general election, Latinx people represented 20% of the city's electorate, increasing voter turnout for the community by nearly 300,000 votes over the 2014 general election. As we prepare for the registration deadline, how has Dominicanos USA planned to continue voter turnout, increasing voter turnout? So I guess the question directly is, how does your organization plan to continue voter turnout short term, and then I guess if you could speak to it long term?
Sure. Well, our experience in the June 23rd primary election allow us to really connect with the voters. We have a very robust database of people that we have registered, people that have also registered to become U.S. citizens. We're looking at, especially for New York, of over 130,000 in our database. So what we do is we continue to connect with those people that we register, the people that we serve, through email, social media, which is very important, as well as using some of the ethnic TV programs and newspapers, that circulates in our different communities to inform them, about the importance of elections, census, and citizenship, which is our three pillars of the work that we really do. But, we take very seriously the part of not only registering them and making sure that they could get out to the polls. Some of the things that we are doing is, we have already in process is we'll be doing close to 5,000 mailers to those new voters that we have registered within the last 6 months of just prior to the pandemic. We are also doing more than 50,000 text messages informing the community, those people that we have in our database, for them to the facilities that they have, where they could go and vote, the hours, and providing the information, as well as phone banking and emails, which is part of our ability to really mobilize our community. We will also be visiting some of the poll sites during the election period, early poll sites, and providing that information. So that's really our main goal, to really mobilize our community. And as we move forward, one of the things that we are really hope to see again is that we used to go every Friday to the USCIS citizenship swearing-in ceremonies to swear in those new immigrants. We used to go every Friday. There used to be 3 ceremonies. We used to register in each ceremony 150 people. We used to register close to about 65% of new immigrants. Every time, you register a new person and you could explain to them, they remain, loyal, they continue to vote. So we hope, that will come back again. We have been experimenting and going out, very limited, to certain areas to provide voter registrations, information, as well as we have a platform that we've been promoting in our website, which is dominicanosusa.org, dominicanosusa.org, where anyone that's interested could register to vote. Our team is assisting those that do call us or contact us. In some instances in the past, we have been mailing them the voter registration and helping them with the information so they could sign it. But because it's such a short period of time presently, what we've been doing is just using a portal, using an online platform to really register them, and as well using the DMV if they have an ID. We know next year, we're talking about the election for November, but next year is going to be very challenging because, as I think Diane probably will discuss a little bit about this, in terms of we have practically the entire or half of the city council representative, mayor, the municipal election, and ranked voting is going to be an educational component, in terms of, how we mobilize, under this new wave of working, post-pandemic, online voter registration. We need to really push, the state assembly to really pass online voter registration, because this tool is already have been proven. It was prepared by NYC Campaign Finance Board, NYC Votes. You just have to turn it on. So this is something that is very, very important, because when you use those portals, it's very hard to continue connecting with the voters. And if you don't connect with the voters, it's not only saying, okay, you did the voter registration, we took it into the Board of Elections. You have to keep informing them when it's election, what is a primary, So it's a lot of educational component that go through this. And apart from that, I think we have to really take advantage of, you know, the new laws that were approved, voting laws, where you could do preteen voter registration at 16, you know, and I think that's something that we really have to work with the Board of Education, with teachers, you know, that teach political science or history, you know, to making sure that we could have that civic, you know, classes and courses, you know, to educate our community, because we know that's a very good way of really, you know, integrating our youth to really participate as we move forward.
Awesome. Eddie, thank you for all the work that you do in the South Bronx and beyond with respect to voter engagement. I'm sure there are a lot of people who will stand to benefit from the resources that you provide. So thanks again.
Thank you.
So Eddie just provided us context of the work that is happening at Dominicanos USA. But now I have the pleasure to introduce Diane, who is the co-president of the League of Women Voters and has been doing a lot of work in the New York City metropolitan area to engage voters and to make sure that they are aware of the upcoming elections and the best way that they can make their voice heard. So now I will pass it to Diane.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. And thanks, Eddie, for all the work that you do. And let me introduce my co-president, Leslie Siegel, who came on the call. So she's here too. So great to see you. And hi, Stephanie, and the work that you guys are doing. So much like Eddie, we are really busy working on our mission, which of course are voter rights, election reform, voter engagement, issues education, issues advocacy, and to expand our reach into as much of New York as we possibly can. And to do that, just want to flip to the next slide, Aaron, that would be great. Thank you. So we've actually created a program that we're really excited about and really proud of, and we're calling them the Outreach Interns. And what we have done is we've partnered with CUNY schools, and we've partnered with Hunter College, York College, Gutman Community College, and with students from other colleges and even some high school students. And what we have done is we've recruited these students and trained them to do outreach work on, starting with voter registration, and now of course they're really working on get out the vote issues, targeting their own home communities. And what we did was we worked with them to establish first some basic civics, because unfortunately a lot of these students, they're brilliant young people who have a gap in their education when it comes to civics. And so conversation around the issues, around what's happening, around the process of voter engagement. And then they began to develop a campaign for their community. And we really kind of gave them open, you know, an open format of determining how do you define your community? Is it your family and friends? Is it the contact list in your phone? Is it the community where you live, your zip code? And then do some research, figure out who is in your community, what are the issues that your community is concerned with, and then create a campaign to encourage them to register to vote, and as we were saying earlier with Eddie, moving this forward. It's not just about the national election, moving it forward into what's going to happen next year in New York with the local elections. So this is an ongoing project. We have students in pretty much every borough in the city now working on their campaigns using their own network and reaching out into their communities. So that's been really, really exciting for us. Then let's see, next slide. You know, we realized that we had to think outside the box also, and that we could not go set up our tables in the school lobby, and we could not be in the cafeterias registering students to vote or registering anybody to vote anywhere in that kind of setting. So we developed our postcard campaign, good old-fashioned postcard campaign. And we had a member artist design this postcard for us. And moving forward, and creating this campaign with our members and volunteers addressing postcards that we received. We went out, we got the addresses from campaign finance, the non-affiliated voters, because obviously we're a 501c3 also, so it would not be appropriate for us to use voters who were registered either in any party. So we're working with unaffiliated voters in the communities that we've identified as being low turnout districts. And the other thing we've done with a campaign with postcarding is we have partnered with New York Institute of Technology, NYIT, and they have created their own postcard, and we provided them addresses, and they're going to be doing an additional 2,000 postcards that they are going to be funding. And then we partnered with the Ethical Culture Society and their school, the Fieldston School, and their 6th grade class is doing a postcard campaign in conjunction with us. And again, we're only providing them the addresses, and the students are creating individualized postcards to send out for the GOTV campaign. So that's been really exciting and a lot of fun to have these great partners. Next slide, please. Then the next thing we've been doing is we reinvigorated something that had been going on at the League for years, and that was the TIS, the Telephone Information Service, which of course were people answering the phones whenever somebody called with questions about the election. But thinking outside the box again, because we're not in our office, we don't have access to our phones, we figured out, and by we I mean Leslie, figured out how to pass these phone calls on to volunteers from their own homes using their own phone numbers to answer these phone calls. And so we created a training program with another member of our board, and we educated our volunteers as to the kinds of questions that they're going to get. And we call it the cheat sheet. They each get the cheat sheet, and they can then access all the various websites, all the information they need to help voters with a myriad of questions that they have. And obviously the number of phone calls we're taking is astronomical. And we know when something is happening in the news about something like absentee ballots, because all of a sudden our phone calls start just spiking like crazy. And so we've been able to stay on top of that. Leslie, did you want to say, no, you're good? Okay. So that's been really enormous. And of course, the closer and closer we get to the election, the more we feel that, we're going to be training more and more volunteers. We're going to bring on more phone lines, and we're going to be there to answer folks' questions. As another part of this, and again, thinking outside the box, we're starting something called voting clinics. And what this is, it's a virtual office hours, if you will, where we're publicizing it as if you need to talk to somebody in person because you have a question about, you don't understand the process of an absentee ballot, or somebody is living overseas in your family and you don't know how to fill out, you don't know how to help them apply for a ballot. And so we're using the Zoom platform, and we're using the breakout rooms so that we can personalize our information for a specific person. So they might be uncomfortable in a group setting, let's say, giving us their address to help them fill in their form, but they're more than willing to go into a breakout room with us and talk with us privately. So we just tried it, it was successful, and we're gonna start pushing it out more and more to try to offer that as a service for folks. Interestingly, the telephone information part, the telephone calling, has really attracted a wide variety of New Yorkers, mostly senior citizens and other people widely spread out in the city who have very limited access to internet or good reception or broadband. And so they don't have access to a computer, and they know to pick up the phone and call the League of Women Voters. We also have discovered that the Board of Elections tells people to call the League of Women Voters. When they call the Board of Elections with a question, they're told, just call the League of Women Voters for that. And so they do. So that's been great. And we know that we are a trusted voice, and we take that very, very seriously about giving out accurate and up-to-date information. Next slide, please. And then what we're also doing with all of this other stuff is in-house. And by in-house, I mean in people's living rooms. We are really working our social media campaign from our office, not just our outreach interns who are doing this into their own communities, but using our own platforms and using our own contacts, getting out information, using social media. We're using Facebook ads that have had fabulous return rates. And we did that with the census and doing it for the GOTV campaign also. So, you know, Eddie's right. It's a challenge and it's tough, and we really had to think outside the box, but we really feel like we are having an impact. We are reaching a much more diverse segment of New York City, and trying to get folks to understand not just how to vote, but the compelling reasons to vote that Aaron, you were talking about earlier.
Awesome. Thanks, Diane. You alluded to my next question when you mentioned that you are trying different tactics to reach out to different segments of society. And one question that I had was about sort of gaps in voting. So according to the New York City Campaign Finance Board, race, ethnicity, education tends to be the highest demographic indicators of voter turnout. I know you mentioned like the voter clinics, but what specifically has the Women League of Voters have done to engage communities that historically have been underrepresented in the electoral process? And as a general practice, what would you recommend that other organizations such as the Center, Dominicanos USA, do to engage groups that have been underrepresented in the voting process in New York City and New York State for that matter?
Right, right. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, our focus is New York City. And one thing that we've really done is we have created a masterful list of various partners and partnerships all over the city. Argus Community, which does work with, they're a residential, mostly a residential program, working with people recovering from drug addiction, alcohol addiction, things like that. We did a voter registration training for their staff, and then they're going out to register their patients, their clients. We worked with organizations like WINS, you know, women's groups who really, we can go in and we can do voter, what we do is we're training those folks in those communities to then go into their own communities to actively register and engage with voters around the issues that they consider important in their own communities. So I would say to nurture and extend these partnerships with organizations. And again, people reach out to us and we find out about organizations, we reach out to them. An organization of medical people called Vote Health 2020 reached out to us. And these are mostly interns and doctors working in hospital settings who want to get involved in the process of registering voters and engaging voters, mostly their patients and their patients' families. So, you know, we can partner with them. We did a voter registration training with them, training them how to reach out to folks. So that's been really effective for us, is sort of that train the trainer model. Same thing with young people, training and our interns, you know, training our interns. How do you register people to vote? How do you get people involved in the electoral process? And we sort of feel like that train that group and then it moves outward like a giant wave. Drop the pebble in the pond and watch it spread.
Yeah, and if I could just kind of tack on a little bit to what Diane is been bringing up, and all the very important stuff that we've been doing. We've also done presentations remotely to some of the community boards in underrepresented areas to kind of talk to people about why it's important to vote, how you can vote, how you register, how you get your ballot, what you do when you get to the poll sites if you want to do that, as well as going into the classrooms, again, remotely at community colleges, again, to talk to their students. I just did one yesterday with York College, for example, where I talked to their students. Mostly, they were all registered, which was great, about how they could vote, how they could become poll workers, things like that, to kind of, and why they should vote, so to engage them in the electoral process.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. And before we transition to Stephanie, I have a two-part question, and feel free to answer part of it or both parts of the question. But I guess the first part of the question is, we know that there are more elections than just the presidential elections. There are state and local elections that have important implications for New Yorkers. And most of the organizations that are participating in this webinar are 501c3 organizations, neutral in nature. But if there is someone who will listen to this webinar who's interested in digging into the policy specifics of the candidates, where can they go to access that information and also learn more about who's on their ballot? That's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, there's been a lot of misconceptions around the upcoming elections, how you can vote, and how COVID-19 sort of compromises voting for New Yorkers. And so what strategies, effective strategies, can New Yorkers take to mitigate the effect that the pandemic has had on voting turnout? So that's the two-part question.
Great. Okay. First part is good. That's a straightforward question. And we actually, National League of Women Voters has a platform called Vote 411. And Vote 411 is sort of like your one-stop shopping for voter information. You can go to Vote 411, you enter your address, it will tell you, first you choose New York, because it is a national platform. You choose New York, you enter your address, it will tell you, based on obviously your address, who represents you, and it will give you the sample ballot of who you're going to be looking at when you actually go to vote. When you click on the candidate's name, it drops down the positions and the platforms on the issues that that candidate has given us. So it's basically their own words and what they stand for. It's a fabulous, fabulous tool. And I highly recommend that everybody check it out. So that's Vote 411. Now, the New York City Board of Elections has a similar sample ballot. And also there's Ballotpedia, which is another platform that does the same thing. But I'm just partial to Vote 411. Take a look, and because it's so simple, you just click on the candidate's name and it takes you right to their position on the issues, and voters can educate themselves. So that's really important. The second part of your question regarding what we can do to protect ourselves and make sure that our vote gets counted, I would say that as voters, we have to really be ready to persevere. The first step would be now, before Election Day, double check your status as a voter. You can do this at the Board of Elections website, vote.nyc. You just want to put in your name, your address, birth date, and it will tell, or you could use voterlookup.com. Check it out. Make sure that you're there. Make sure that it says status active, because Friday is the deadline. So if it says status active, you know you are good to go to the polls. If it says status inactive, your name's not going to be in the book. You are still a registered voter, but when you go, you're going to have to know to say, I need an affidavit ballot, if you're not in the book. If it doesn't have you in at all, then quick, between now and Friday, get that done, get yourself registered. Then I would say, make your plan. And Eddie was talking about all the possible ways that we can now vote here in New York. make a decision. Are you going to vote early? If so, go back to the Board of Elections website, find out where your early poll site is and when the hours are. Also, I'm looking for this document. Oh, nope, that's not it. Okay. You should be, there it is. Leslie's holding it up. Thank you, Leslie. See, this is why we're co-presidents. This works great. Oh, Eddie's got his too. So you're going to get this in the mail, and that's what it looks like, junk mail, but it's not. It's very, very important. It will tell you where your early poll site is. It'll tell you the times that it's open. It'll give you a fast card. It looks like the kind of card you get at the grocery store. There it is. Leslie's holding that up. And you can take that with you to the polls. Make sure you don't even have to stand in line anymore. You take that with you, you bypass the line, you go straight to the tables, and you'll be able to vote. So that'll make it quicker for the voter. Have all of that information. For regular election day, again, your poll site's probably going to be different. We have to educate ourselves. The lines may be long, persevere. Don't let anybody tell you you're not eligible to vote. If somebody says to you you're not in the book, ask for an affidavit ballot, but make sure you're in the right poll site. That's important, so you want to check that information. If you're going to vote absentee, you have till October 27th, as Eddie was saying. Then your application is in, you'll get your ballot. Be careful, all the steps that Eddie was describing about signing that oath envelope, all of that stuff, super important. So I would say those are the ways to safeguard ourselves. Check it out, be sure that you've got what you need, and then persevere.
Awesome.
Let me add something to what Diane said, because it's so important, providing this information. She said something that's very, 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 everything was very important. But, the Board of Elections has a very easy website that you could go to. It says vote.nyc, vote.nyc. She mentioned the situation of making sure you could go to the appropriate poll sites. We got to bring out the information that once you look at your poll site locator, which I've been seeing in the chat, the early voting sites is different from the voting site on the day of election. And when you look at the poll sites, it tells you specifically, what are the locations or poll site location for early voting. And then at the bottom, once you open it up, you see, you could also, it indicates the day of election where you're supposed to go. In most cases, it's the same poll site they have been to, but that's the questions we've been getting. And this is very important information. And I just want to add to Diane that she says, thinking outside the box. After 100 years, with the League of Women Voters celebrating New York City, I commend you because, this is a new era, and you are really adapting to so many good ideas in your presentation. I really, from the bottom of my heart, I said, continue. Another 100 years.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you,
And
Diane.
if I could just add, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Just really, really quickly, if you do decide to vote absentee, you also have the option to drop it off in person at any poll site during early voting or on election day. So any poll site, there'll be a drop box inside the poll site where you can just drop it. Or you can drop it off at your county board of elections. I was at the Manhattan Board of Elections just this morning. The poll site's actually the drop box is right in the entrance. So you just go in, drop it off and leave. That's another really good option for returning an absentee ballot.
Awesome. Thank you for all the work that the League of Women Voters does in the New York City metro area. And hopefully our audience will find this informative as they prepare for the voter registration deadline and the upcoming election. So thank you. Finally, I will transition to Stephanie Bizzell, who is the Director of Policy and Advocacy at College and Community Fellowship. And they will sort of speak to the work that they are doing around voter engagement, specifically as it affects justice involved people, because they are an important part of the electorate. So without further ado, I will pass it to Stephanie.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us. It's really an honor to be on this panel with such esteemed people who have been doing this for so long. Ecology Community Fellowship civic engagement has not necessarily been our focus, but our theory of change is rooted in the idea that we have to empower those who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system in order for them to succeed. So I myself act as merely a facilitator in their own achievement of success. And so we had been doing that through a variety of means, primarily rooted in getting higher education restored. That's, Pell, as many people know, as part of the violent crime bill, but we saw civic engagement as a natural extension of that. Empirically, it has a lot of ties to increased, economic mobility, volunteerism. It has all of these benefits that one does not necessarily think of, especially when examining communities that have been ravaged by what I would say is the disease of cyclical incarceration. Because if you look at the distribution over the city, there was a very famous study that identified 7 regions that are responsible largely for the making up. There's about 7 neighborhoods, and New York City Department of Probation still operates on this premise that we're responsible for roughly 85% of everyone in prison. And these 7 neighborhoods are all in New York City, and then all these people are moved up New York State. So ours began with the recognition of a problem, and that was that of voter suppression. And what we had seen is that in a lot of get out the vote efforts that were geared towards people who were justice impacted, it was a lot of guilting and shaming people into not exercising voting, which we found to be incredibly unjust and unfair, considering the system was really designed to exclude the very people who were being shamed and who were being put in the system. So we begin, as I'll refer back to in our program, with a discussion of the origin of voter suppression, which of course actually goes back to something called civil death. And I just want to read off this quote because I think it's so important. William Blackstone, one of the sort of founders of case law in America today, said, and this was in reference to when they took away the right to vote. This is the origin of where it comes from. Blackstone, later interpreting case law, said, "Civil death was used only when it was clear beyond all dispute that the criminal is no longer fit to live upon the earth, but is to be exterminated as a monster and a bane to human society." So that's how severe taking the right to vote away from, but in true American fashion, we have extended that out just as we have with a thirst for penalties. So voter suppression, as it says here, is often thought of as a red state problem. People think of the sort of traditional intimidation tactics. A lot of us are familiar with what happened in Georgia with Stacey Abrams and various other mechanisms such as that. Next slide. This actually, it's just as prevalent in New York, which is explored on the next slide. I didn't know if that transition would work, so that's exciting. So what we have is, this is only a very academic term and is something that we really need to discuss more. But we have in New York voter suppression, very much so. It's insidious, and it is the back on which our system is built. There's a reason that many people discussed and that we talked about that New York has like the 8th lowest voter turnout. And everything from the fact that, thankfully, and I know people on this call were instrumental in this early voting passed, but the idea that we would have everyone come in on one day and only one day from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And have to vote on that day only really means that only the most affluent people are going to be voting, because you have to have a caregiver in place, if you have children, if you're a single mother, in addition to a number of issues, such as, you need to have a job where you're able to take that time off, which a lot of people aren't. They'll get severely penalized. And then, if we could just continue with the same slide. The same thing is true for all of the ways in which all of the things that we talked about and that the panelists revealed as deficits all amount to a really small group of people being allowed to vote. And if you look at the actual registration forms, all over it is you are going to face up to $5,000 fine and 4 years in jail if you commit perjury. And it's everywhere throughout the ballot, even though, a comprehensive study by the Washington Post found that there had only been, over the course of 14 years, 31 credible instances of voter fraud. It's just constantly put in someone's face. And with justice impacted people in New York, it's a very complex set of rules for eligibility. In a good way, it expands it so that a lot of people actually are eligible who don't realize that they are, but that's part of the problem, is there's this lack of dissemination of information. Next slide, please. And so we did find there's about 10% of people who are justice impacted who are eligible to vote actually exercise that right. And we have been trying to explore what would motivate people to mobilize to the polls, and what would make it such that people were had a vested interest, and we wanted it to be rooted in autonomy and choice. We found a lot of non-for-profits in the criminal justice space have just been signing people up, registering them en masse, particularly for this election, and that a lot of people have institutional mistrust, and if they feel as though they don't want to vote, they shouldn't have to. The messengers are also, the parole officers are primarily messengers for people with justice impacted, which is a model that does not make sense, because you're policing those people and then you're telling them about their rights, and they're not walking them through the process of how do you actually successfully vote? How do you do all of these things when it may seem easy to someone who's done it, every year continuously, but it's actually not. And the problem is further compounded by the fact that campaigns, just as a matter of course, are looking up, okay, I can see publicly available that whether or not you're registered, and then I can see if you voted for the past 3 years. I'm not going to spend money reaching out to you, seeing how you want to vote, if I have to do 2 touch points with you, because that's costly to my campaign. So we want to remedy that and make sure that they're not left out for all of the different, perfect storm of things that cause the issue. Next. So what we did is, what we're doing right now is a 3-session nonpartisan curriculum, and it's supposed to provide self-efficacy. And as mentioned by the other panelists, it's not geared towards 2020. It's also talks about how important it is to participate in local elections, and that people really need to do that. And we want people to walk away feeling like they have the skills and the resources, not only to be a voter, but an informed voter. And I know some of us, for example, myself in the past, have just gone in and voted down ballot for a particular party, but really giving people the resources to research the particular candidates and make determinations. So the ultimate goal, and I don't think it's going to be achieved by CCF by November 3rd, but the ultimate goal, and we work with several other organizations that are led by people who are formerly incarcerated under the banner of FICPFM, which is such a long title, I won't go into it, but we want to make sure that there is a powerful voting bloc. COVID revealed what we already knew, that there was complete sense of disposability of human lives, no sense of any sort of accountability to anyone behind bars, no matter their nature or length of sentence. And we need politicians to feel that they are accountable. We have created the beast of mass incarceration. We have made it such that 1 in 3 Americans have voting convictions. It is way worse, and there's way overrepresentation for people of color because they are overcriminalized, not because they have a greater propensity for crime. And so we need to make sure that this voting bloc is showing up so that we are not continuously advocating for more and more just and policies that involve human dignity and getting absolutely no response.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie, for speaking about the work that CCF is doing and creating that curriculum for justice-involved people to get involved and do outreach to other justice-involved people. I know we're at time, but I want to make sure that questions are sort of posed to our panelists. So if any of our community members have a question, feel free to use the chat function. And we'll just take one question because we're at time, but feel free to unmute yourself or write in the chat your question for Stephanie or any of the panelists.
Hi, my name is Giuseppe. I just wanted to hear from the heads of the organizations. I'm from the South Bronx myself. I come from an immigrant household. My mother is Dominican. Informing individuals that are not fluent in English as either as well. I mean, I'm sorry. For someone who is younger, how are we able to help you guys more with our communities besides the internship that you mentioned or social media? What else am I able to do? Because it's simple to tell somebody you have to vote, but it's hard when they're kind of I don't want to vote for either parties. I don't want to vote for Biden because of whatever reason. I don't want to vote for Trump for whatever reason. So what are some things that I can tell them so that it's not just picking between the lesser of the two evils, you know?
It's a great question, and I commend you, for asking. But basically, I could tell you that when we have been doing the student voter registration program and talking to our youth, young people, we try to connect. Why is it important of voting? One of the question is, do you know that the funding that is allocated for schools, for transportation, is based on, decisions that are made by the elected officials, budget, participating in community boards and, really providing information that they could relate, why is it important? And I think you have to connect it. It's not only go and vote, because when we first started, people will tell us, oh, I don't want to vote because, not the politicians don't do anything. It's not about the politicians. It's about, the future, of really getting better housing, more educational program, college, funding, in terms of programs. So, you have to connect it to something, that's what I could add to it in terms of our outreach.
So making it more personable and more relatable for them instead of it just being go vote, go give in your vote. Yeah.
And one of the things that we actually recommend is when you're talking to somebody who's resistant to voting for whatever reason, is to actually first agree with them. So if they say something like, the politicians don't care about us, it's okay to say, you know what, I agree with you, they don't. This is one of the reasons we actually need to turn out and vote, because we need to vote in politicians who do care about us. And often just by validating what they believe, you're already engaging them in a way that they haven't been engaged before.
True. Okay. Well, thank you for your answers. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I would also agree with everybody and also just reiterate, it's all about the issues. If somebody doesn't like a particular candidate, it doesn't matter about the how the candidate looks or anything. It's about the issues. It's about what does this candidate stand for, and does he stand for or she stand for something, or they stand for something that matters to me and matters to my community. And that's what I'm looking for. What does this candidate stand for, and can I support this candidate based on that stand?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the great question. And there are other ways that you can get involved. So if you're interested in volunteering, the center has a regular volunteer meeting where we meet once a month, and we do a lot of work with census, racial justice, in addition to voting. So if you're interested, I can follow up after this meeting, but your point is definitely well taken, and thank you for raising that question. So with that said, I want to thank you all for joining us today for this important webinar. I'll be sure to follow up with resources that have been mentioned in today's webinar. And thank you. So as we approach the voter registration deadline, feel free to share these resources with your family members, friends, because these state, local, and federal elections have huge implications for the next couple of years, as all of the panelists mentioned. So thank you again for your time and lending your expertise, and we appreciate it. So thank you all, and have a great day.
Do I follow up with you through the Zoom call, or do I email you?
You can email me. I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and I'll be sure to follow up. So I'm going to do that now. Did you register for the event? Because I can just find your email and then email you afterwards.
No, I didn't. For this
Okay.
event? Oh,
no worries. So just stay on the webinar, and then that way I'll drop my my email in the chat so you can contact me.
okay, no problem.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining, and feel free to reach out with any questions.
Karen, do you want to stop recording so it doesn't pick up?
Yep. Did you get the email?
I just emailed you in regards to the, like, what registration for what event? The meeting, the monthly meeting?
Yeah, for the monthly meeting. So we have a text banking campaign coming up, okay, where a few volunteers are going to reach out to folks across the state, just to not only speak about the elections, but like ways that people can get involved. So it's on October 15th. Okay. And I'll send you more information, but we would love to have you there. It's like a relaxed, chill time. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
I'm going to be away at school that weekend.
Okay.
The only thing. I'm leaving next weekend, so like I would really love to stay involved with you guys though. I'm really interested in that.
Yeah.
So definitely for anything else, you can email me. For any other like volunteering, for any other help, I'm willing to like lend a helping hand for you guys.
Okay. I appreciate it, and thank you for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Have a good one.
Awesome. Take care.